Okay, so today I would like to chat about practical implications of the practice of psychoanalysis and cultivation within framework of Daoism. So Lacanian psychoanalysis has been compared with Buddhism a lot in the modes of its application and its striving to penetrate towards that no subject area. There has been a lot of writing on the topic, comparison of the practice of Lacanian psychoanalysis with practice of Buddhism. However, there isn't much in a way of that comparison with the practice of Taoist cultivation. Indeed, Lacan has referred to Buddhism a number of times in his seminar. Not extensively, but even less so, he referred to Daoism, particularly non-existent, this reference, except a certain time when he was studying Chinese with Francois Chan in Paris and looking into Chinese painting, Chinese poetry, and amongst other things at Daodejing, seminal text of Daoism, the classic of the way and the virtue. And he made a few observations, remarks, which then have been recorded by Chan in his memoir. And we'll look not so much at those remarks, because they're very scarce, but actually what unfolds in the practice of Lacanian psychoanalysis and how does it relate to the practice of cultivation, and is there tangibility in that relation. So, that being said, the title, Lacan avec Dao. Let's start with the very first, which is Dao itself, what it is, because that's what Lacan looks at and being amazed at whilst having his lessons with Francois Chan. Dao, the word Dao, as we know it, is this. That's Dao. Apologies in advance, it might be a lengthy chat, because we gotta look at various aspects in psychoanalytic theory and cultivation theory, etc. So, Dao means a few things. It means the way, obviously, the great way of Daoism, whatever, or just the way, how to find the way. It also means to say, or to enunciate, or to quote, or to express. But it also means to think, to suppose. It's as a conversational term. It could be said as, it could be used as wodao, shema, shema, shema. I suppose this and that. A few things. That's what Lacan pays attention to, and that's what he then kind of sketches in a little scheme of his, let's say again, Dao as a character. He goes like this. Because Dao has these two aspects, and reading the first line of Daodejing, first verse of Daodejing, we can explicate the following. He goes as Dao, its first aspect is doing, active, walking the way. By the way, the chars of the character, which is comprised of these, this is a cho, which is walking. And this show, which is leader, head, or first, implying a person. So a certain someone, head of the crowd perhaps, walks, and that's what we call the way. So it involves doing, and within Taoist, I guess, understanding of Lacan, not actual Taoist understanding, it is equated to nameless, and no desire. So here already Lacan equates Tao, this aspect of Tao, with the real, with the doings, proceedings of nature, of how things unfold. Second aspect, he says, of the Tao is speaking, following actual etymological usage of the character or the word speaking, and of course named, and with desire. And if you're a little bit familiar with psychoanalytic theory, which I have plenty of videos on this channel, desire is a big part of subjectivity, and that's what we look at, how desire manifests, and the symptom, whether it's shriveled, whether it is flowing, etc. And certain registers of the psyche, such as symbolic in particular, have to do with desire more than anything else. Speaking strictly within the real, there is no desire. It's not there, because desire operates within the named, within the signifiers of language. So, having produced this schema, let's maybe sort of delineate it like this, Lacan then asks his teacher at the time, Francois Chan, what mediates between these two aspects of his schematization of Tao. Well, what Chan tells them is void median. There's the third between the two. This is, for Lacan, in his understanding, this void median, which Chen just kind of blurted out. How does this relate? Well, why a void, of course. Through void, things manifest. From void, things manifest. From Wuji arises Taiji, from Taiji arises Yin and Yang, from Yin and Yang, 10,000 things eventually. For Lacan, this void, applicably to the psyche, because that's what Lacan worked with, psychoanalysis works with the psyche. This void median equals the letter. So what we're going to do now is to dive into this concept of the letter within Lacan, both early Lacan and later Lacan, and we compare it with the signifier as a concept and as the practical aspect of analysis. And then this gives us a certain foundation from which we'll dive into cultivation theory and how cultivation practice within Daoism, within actual Daoism, with not Lacanian understanding of Daoism, or Lacanian glimpse into Daoism, because he definitely hasn't had extensive study into the matter to have a full-on understanding how it differs, Okay, so let me get rid of this etymological mambo jumbo. So, the letter. What does Lacan mean when he says the letter? Well, in the earlier conceptions of Lacan, in his earlier time of practice, he wasn't that concerned with the letter. He hasn't yet formulated that concept. He is concerned more with the signifier and the logic of the signifier. And the letter is treated as the material aspect of the signifier, material element of language itself. Because as Lacan insists, language has materiality with which it, say, narrates or inscribes the body, which then creates particular patterns of subjectivity, subjective structure, and if we jump to a, say, Chinese medical perspective, creates the patterns of disharmony, patterns of subjective personal functioning, originating initially with the use of language, which how language overrides the psyche, the energy, the body. So, in early Lacan's, the letter is the very minimal symbolic element, material aspect of language. Why does he call it a letter? Well, because he insists on the literal, not imaginary. He insists that the actual form, actual inscription of language is what matters, not its meaning, not the meaning it carries. Yeah, that's crucial. That's what kind of, in my opinion, differentiates psychoanalysis from psychology. Yeah, psychoanalysis does not look at meaning. It's what it means to you, what it means in general, like that jump into the archetypal theory, sort of symbols, as Jung tried to do. That's not psychoanalysis, at least not Freudian or Lacanian psychoanalysis. Because it deals with meaning, deals with content rather than with the actual inscription. Okay, so the early Lacan is the logic of signifier. And most clearly it is expressed in his seminar on purloined letter. And actually that's where the concept of the letter originates from as well. The Edgar Allan Poe's story, Purloined Letter, in which a letter is purloined by a minister from a queen and used as an object of blackmail, and it circulates from queen to the minister. Then Dupin, the whatever you call him, the primordial Sherlock Holmes, nicks it from the minister and returns via the chief of police to the queen. On the example of this story, Lacan illustrates how signifier circulates and how signifier defines subjective position. And what he stresses is that content of that signifier does not matter, because in the story of Poe there is never revealed, it's never revealed what is actually written in the letter. It does not matter. What matters is that how it structures relations, A, within the symbolic, between the subjects, and how it structures relation between signifiers within the psyche. Because letter circulates within the psyche all the same. So, the key point that Lacan makes in the seminar on purloined letter, which is quite complicated, goes very deep into the numerical theory, into the cybernetics. Eventually, Lacan just reduces everything to the binary code, the way signifier circulates. And he uses as an example the coin toss, really, odd and even. He shows on that example how within that small minimal symbolic operation, 0 and 1, arises a certain law, linguistic law, mathematical law, a certain pattern, then in turn determines how elements function within that system. So he shows how meaning arises independence on these operations of displacement of signifier within the psyche, its condensation within the psyche, which he equates to linguistic tropes of metaphor and metonymy. He insists that the meaning arises after the initial binary operation of letters displacement has taken place. Meaning then simply resurfaces as a result. Because at certain points the signifier is displaced within the unconscious, it is repressed. Its effect, the metaphor, is a symptom, such as whatever complaints people have when they come to see a specialist, mental health specialist. It could be slips of the tongue as they speak, it could be bungled actions, it could be dreams, return of the jouissance, the corporeal disturbance, psychic disturbance. These are effects, but the initial operation, which is hinged on the laws of language, laws of syntax, laws of grammar, laws of punctuation, is what undermines it. The meaning in the system pretty much is fully determined by that system's laws of exchange. Yeah? That's actually why if somebody learns another system of codification, another language, certain psychic problems just vanish. Why? Because new system of codification is introduced and it allows for more possibilities of inscription of jouissance, of its articulation, symbolization, which dissolves certain symptoms which before have been present since they relied on the linguistic operations and a different system of laws, different grammar. If you take, for example, Chinese grammar, English grammar, or Russian grammar, they're quite different. They structure your mind very differently. If you're a bilingual person, you know how it is, like when you think in one language and you think in another language. Two different systems of codifications. Mind structures differently, psyche structures differently, expression is different. Symptoms are different. Some symptoms do not exist if you operate under one language. They start to exist when you switch to another language. So that's what Lacan shows, that logic of signifier is intrinsically linked to the inner workings of language. And that's from there that comes the Lacanian axiom that the unconscious is structured like a language. Whereas unconscious as well is where the signifiers are circulating without a subject's awareness of their circulating. Only when they kind of surface as some kind of symptom, some kind of insistence, a subject notices it. Usually it is disturbing. That's why they go to see some specialist. So, where does Lacan take all this letter, signifier? Well, of course, from Freud. He doesn't do anything else but rereads Freud. And in Freud, these are nothing but memory traces, word presentations, as he called them. Yeah. Lacan shows how memory traces, when enter the linguistic exchange within the unconscious, are nothing but automatic. It's an automatic mechanism which functions on its own, just like the linguistic system functions on its own. It simply repeats. So Lacan then translates the repetition compulsion from Freud into the repetition automatism. The story simply narrates itself. The psyche narrates itself. It keeps, the signifiers keep circulating. And that circulation of signifiers within the unconscious has nothing to do with imaginary representations of a subject which are known to him or her as I. I is simply a consequence, a meaning, an imaginary result of automatic circulation of signifiers. Okay. So in the early Lacan, the letter is the remainder of the signifier which leaves its trace on the body. That's already close enough to the letter later of conception of the letter. Let's look at it. Let's see what Lacan does a little bit later. So later, Lacan introduces such concepts as objet A and jouissance. When he does his paraloid letter seminar, he hasn't yet spoken of jouissance to such an extent, or his theory of objet A as the object between language and the real, the drive, has not yet been articulated. Then, when he does actually articulate it, the letter becomes that very in-between area. He speaks of the letter as littoral. And littoral is the word that signifies a shoreline, that border between the land and the water, be it sea or lake or river, whatever, shoreline. So the border between what? The border between language and jouissance. Enjoyment. That's disturbing and enjoyable, yet dreadful quality of the experience of the drive when it engulfs the subject's experience of present reality. Language cuts out jouissance. Jouissance gives us that very enigmatic, shattering, disturbing experience which need to be put into words. So letter, according to later Lacan, is that which is in between, that frontier between expressions of language and experience of jouissance. It marks the border. It's a material trace, the mark on the body, the trace of enjoyment, and crucially, for the practice, it is that which resists, I forgot the order of letters, resists interpretation. Bear with me, this stuff gets clearer, especially now as we're going to compare signifier and the letter in later Lacan. I guess Lacan was getting his own clarity as well as he went along. So, let's go. Signifier, letter. Let's draw a little chart. I think this black one is dying, so I'll use a blue one. Signifier is that which circulates in the unconscious. It is that which produces meaning. When signifier surfaces, the meaning follows immediately because subject starts to relate that signifier to the consistent experience of I, which is imaginary, which interprets everything in terms of meaning. So the meaning arises from signifiers. However, latter resists meaning. That's why it resists interpretation. Meaning can be interpreted. When there is no meaning, there is nothing to interpret. So it's a very minimal instance. Because signifier circulates, we say it is differential. It circulates according to linguistic system, according to laws of metaphor and metonymy. Letter doesn't really circulate, it's material. It is inscribed and it remains where it is inscribed. It's like a deadlock which interpretation hits and cannot go any further. Following from that, signifiers structured in a chain. Let's just write down chain. Whereas letter is isolated. I've already spoken in one video that distinction between signifiers in relation, which is signifiers in the chain, and signifiers in isolation, which precisely denotes the letter. Signifier, when it is isolated from the rest of the network, has that quality of perhaps traumatic, perhaps insisting, real disturbance. So, as it goes, signifiers pertain to the symbolic, whereas letter borders the real. It's not quite the real, because there is nothing to be signified in the real, so it's something that is on the border of the real. The letter is what in the signifier touches the real. So we can speak of signifiers as symptoms arise. Someone comes with the complaints, difficulties, disturbances, dissatisfactions, excesses, deficiencies, whatever. They have symptomatic effects. They can free associate, main technique of psychoanalysis, express themselves, and then find those signifiers which will surface, and then produce meaning out of them. And then via interpretation, this meaning kind of dissolves. It is from being condensed, is again displaced and reverberates further through the chains of signifiers in the network of the symbolic. So its traumatic effect is thereby alleviated. The letter, when it is hit, cannot be interpreted, or its traumatic effects are not reducible via interpretation. That's the main difference. Let us look at what letter is not. So, letter is not an imprint. Letter is not an imprint. So why is this even a concern? Well, at the time when Lacan was formulating this understanding, there was a debate between him and Derrida, Jacques Derrida, who was in his essay essay on grammatology, insisting that writing is primary to language. It is like a first fundamental trace from which sense follows, or sense or meaning tries to catch up to. For Lacan, that's not so. The writing itself is not an imprint on the psyche, something else is. What is an imprint on the psyche is not the written. It is a certain non-pertinent knowledge, what Lacan calls savoir. This is the knowledge which has been exercised in the oral speaking tradition, knowledge of songs, spoken myth, dramatic processions, cathartic rituals. These are the initial inscriptions according to Lacan, from which writing follows, which writing only later codifies. A good example to this, I think, is the history of Buddhism, because initially Buddhism has not been recorded, not been written, because language hasn't been used, written language. It has been transmitted orally through discourses, through chants of monks. They were memorized and then reiterated again and again. Only a couple centuries later, they have been recorded on paper. Same goes in the sort of history of humanity. The imprints that are left by writing is not what Lacan means by letter. The imprints are what is left via tradition of speech, tradition of incantation, a certain spell, if you like, mythological story. That's one thing. Another, not. Letter is not an instrument. Not an instrument. It's not a building block of discourse. Yeah. So like, it's definitely not alphabetic letter that Lacan speaks about. It's another agency. It has a material agency. Agency which actually acts on materiality of the body. Why bodies, actual psychophysiology of the body, of different religious, cultural backgrounds, also vary considerably. Why? Well, because they're overwritten by other set of letters, by other set of spoken myth, dramatic procession, religious incantation, chant, whatever. Different kind of non-pertinent knowledge is at play at different, culturally different bodies. Eventually, Lacan generalizes and simplifies that distinction in order not to pluralize it into all the countries and cultures there is, into two simple distinctions, which is, yeah, I have to get rid of this, nowhere else to write, which is distinction between alphabetic writing and hieroglyphic writing. So let's say, okay, the letter, alphabetic tradition, which again, it's not actually a letter of the alphabet, and the hieroglyphic tradition. These are two primary forms. According to Lacan, to the first tradition, the alphabetic tradition, the tradition of the signifier, his theory outlined in the Purloin Letter Seminar, the theory of the logic of the signifier, its circulation, condensation and displacement. codification of patterns into a system. That's what is at work. For another one, Lacan hasn't produced any elaborate textual exegesis or theoretical exegesis apart from what he speaks of in the text called literature in the beginning of the 70s in his seminar. He speaks about his time of flying in a plane over Siberian desert, desolate Siberian plain, because at the time the flights between Europe and Japan were opened over Soviet-Russian Siberian plain, of course via a route which is not near any military installations or whatever, near any cities. It's just desolate plain, and he flies in the airplane over that snowy desert, and he sees contours of the rivers rivers written on that void, like traces, like characters, like shorelines, and that to him is a hieroglyphic tradition of tracing rather than system of signifiers. Of course, eventually those traditions also build systems of signifiers. If you look in the Chinese writing, there are character keys there which can be then organized into the larger character patterns which form the whole system of language. And then not so long ago, the transcribing of the characters via letters of the alphabet has been introduced. That's called pinyin, and it's not dissimilar to alphabetic tradition, but in its origin, and that's what Lacan differentiates, it is quite not the same. Yeah. For him, the tradition of hieroglyph is very close to what is done in Chinese painting, as the tradition of traces which function without indicating, without signifying what is there. Just like over that Siberian plain, nothing human is there, nothing of civilization to be signified, to be seen on the horizon, just certain traces, certain marks. So that to him is more or less the origin of written linguistic expression in the real. And here's another allusion. He speaks about the marks of the primitive hunter, so-called unary traits. They are not even counting. So they say the hunter marks a certain event, a kill during the hunt, on the wall of the cave as something, a line perhaps, a vertical line. And he keeps doing so as the day goes by and the new events arise. Those markings, they're not letters, they're not numbers, they're just traits or traces of something which has taken place. So this is what the letter is, the very rudimentary element of symbolic system, the element that precedes the symbolic system. And yet it leaves the mark, the imprint on the psyche. So if we talk about psyche in the sort of genealogical sense, a certain event perhaps takes place. Perhaps this event is traumatic. Perhaps it occurs before a subject has acquired language, in a nascent period, in a baby period. It does not just go without trace, so to speak. It leaves a trace, and that trace precisely is a letter. That vertical line or whatever, that something that is imprinted on a memory of a subject before language has taken place. Perhaps some whatever traumatic event occurs, a violent scene, a shout, and the baby is there. The baby doesn't know the meaning of the words uttered, the essence of the situation. It cannot symbolize it, but the event has left its mark. That's the letter. That's the letter. Okay. Because letter cannot be interpreted, because it hasn't entered the order of the signifiers, it relates to repetition. It repeats. Whenever it's encountered, it is circumvented by language, not touched via meaning, hence not interpretable, hence it insists, it repeats. When we talk about symptoms in psychoanalytic discourse, maybe let's go pink, symptom. We can speak of symptom in two ways. One way, signifier. Another way, letter. Of course. So the signifier level is that which I just explained. It produces meaning. It is structured in a chain. It is possible to be differentiated, substituted by other signifiers, etc. Letter, a stubborn mark of jouissance, of disturbing inscription, resists interpretation and remains kind of that kernel, the real kernel of the symptom, the navel of the dream, as Freud spoke about it. Something, when all the elements of the dream have been analyzed, interpreted, something remains inaccessible to language. That mark, that shoreline, that littoral, where language borders on the unspoken or functionally unspeakable, is the letter. So signifier functions on the level of what we call transferential unconscious. Transferential unconscious is where sort of the most revelatory moments of analysis occur, where subject gets the aha moment. So this is why I'm like this is why I'm like that, that's because someone said this and that left with me or whatever, because of that combination of events, because of that view of certain narrative that has taken place, etc. This occurs when the subject brings their lack, their symptom to the other, who's supposed to know, the analyst, and through the transference, the traumatic elements of the psychic life become differentiated and thereby dissolved. It's the active phase of analysis. The latter part of the symptom pertains to the real unconscious. That's the part where the inertia starts. Yeah. Subject sort of drops into that psychic space whereby nothing can be said anymore, because already it all been said here on the level of transferential material. But something still persists, yeah, and it's a not comfortable space. So the subject dwells there, yeah. This has been a symbolic layer. Whatever in the unconscious can be worked with on the level of the signifier, linguistic signifier, interpreted, produce meaning linked to the other discourse of the larger symbolic system. Here, no longer. Yeah, it's a fixed mark of jouissance, not reducible to meaning, repeats insistently. So when that is hit, the inertia occurs, which subject has to sort of sit with for a while until a few things happen. let's see what can happen and how it happens actually. Well, first of all, an analyst is there to produce certain interventions. Yeah. Here, analysts produce such interventions as interpretation, for example, oracular interpretation, as it goes in Lacanian psychoanalysis. Here, analysts can also insert the cuts, the scansion of the discourse. It can stop the discourse of a subject so that discourse could actually fixate on a particular signifier, which has been otherwise avoided by a subject. It isolates the signifier and phrase, and that subject dwells on it until it actually transforms and enters the order of exchange within the symbolic. Repetitions can be emphasized here, the linguistic repetitions of the patterns of life. Equivocation is introduced here as well, just the similarity of sound of certain signifiers, which kind of get meshed together, equated within the psyche, and produce this kind of sort of sliding symbolic effects, which cause disturbance, cause certain confusion, etc. Here, analyst can only be there, only listen, and continuously point to that area of the impossible, which is the real, until a subject accepts as what? As their own way of enjoyment. Until eventually, like anywhere, like really this is where psychoanalysis borders on cultivation. When that insistent disturbance, which comes from isolated linguistic marks, the letter, is just accepted and seen as that's the way I enjoy my symptom. Yeah. That's the way I enjoy the dukkha, the suffering of life, so to speak. That's the way I accept it. Here, the subject is capable at this stage to invent, again, this goes further, invention. Invent a certain solution, and that solution is what we call symptom. It's a particular, specific, individual, idiosyncratic solution to that their own specific, idiosyncratic mode of suffering that the subject invent for themselves. There is, of course, there's a difference between psychoanalysis and psychology. There is no universal solution to psychic problems. There are only individual solutions. Perhaps here there may be some universal solutions, yeah, on the level of transferential unconscious. Whatever, certain patterns of mixing terms, confusions, attitudes can be kind of generalized. Oh, you are that way because your father was treating you in that particular way and your mother wasn't there, or etc. Okay, that can be universalized and can be spoken, can be interpreted. Here, no. Here the solution must come from the subject themselves. And that solution is their own creative output. Something that they invent, create. The end of analysis thus comes as a creative act of that acceptance. Yeah. So, why have we been talking at length about Lacanian analytic process? Well, to show that all of these, within the triumvirate of the real, symbolic, and imaginary, all of these constitutes symbolic and imaginary. Yeah. And these letter located somewhere here on the border, no, or on register, somewhere here on the border between real and symbolic. That's the letter. Lacan sees the human psyche as the interplay of these registers. Register of the ego, imaginary, register of the subject, symbolic, register of the thingness, the order of life, I suppose, the real, which resists interpretation. And henceforth, Lacan's understanding of Tao is also within the triumvirate of this theory, real, imaginary, and symbolic. If we come back to his conception of Tao, Tao for Lacan is this, real and symbolic, in the dichotomy. Doing, nameless, devoid of desire. Speaking, name, replete, or named, replete with desire. In between, the latter, the void median. So now we know at least what he talks about when it is the latter that is at stake. So, what has doing the order of things in the cosmos, the real, just goes devoid of desire. That which has alterations within that order of doing due to human desire is the symbolic. All of that Lacan sees as Tao. So the frontier between them is the letter, and the solution to that letter, the symptom, the individual way of treating jouissance. In fact, Lacan, after one session with Francois Chan, allowed himself a little bit of this interpretative remark. He said, don't remember exactly what he said, but something along the lines of, despite all the difficulties and displacements you have gone through, Francois, because he obviously escaped China during the Cultural Revolution and thereby avoided prosecution and went through a fair share of difficulties himself. So Lacan told him as a token of good friendship, so perhaps all these difficulties you've been through could be reconciled by means of this void median. But by means of this solution that you have invented. And indeed, Chan has written a lot of books and has led a rich creative life. So that's solution. That's the solution for the disturbance. Again, Tao constitutes all of that, both disturbance and that its solution for Lacan. So, to summarize, analytic work, work with the psyche, work with alleviation of the symptoms of traumatic encounters within the psyche has to do with A, pure analytic work, just talking about stuff, allowing the traumatic elements of language to dissolve and dissipate along the linguistic chain. Another aspect of this work is the encounter of the letter, inertia, acceptance of one's way of enjoyment, and invention of the solution to it individually, which we call symptom. This is what constitutes how to deal with the psyche, and that for Lacan is Tao of psychoanalysis. Yeah. Now, cultivation, of course, goes further. Yeah. On the premise of cultivation, or cultivation's main premise is that this is okay. You can do this. You can chat to a therapist if you need to, if it's really that disturbing, or you can chat to your friends and figure things out. You can sit with yourself until you hit that inertia. That's what meditation does for you perfectly. And use your creative life and practice to develop a solution to your own psychic difficulty. That's easy. Within the framework of cultivation, that's easy. So that gives us a perspective, yeah? No matter how difficult and convoluted psychoanalytic theory and practice is, from the perspective of cultivation, this is actually easy. Because there are things that are more difficult to do, yeah? What's more difficult to do, it's touch upon the level of that within, not Lacanian, actual framework of Daoism, which is the area preceding the level of naming. Yeah. Let us look into that piece of theory now. So probably this is a good time to remind us what is the first verse of Daodejing, what are the first few lines within the Daodejing. Within Daodejing it says at the beginning of that work, the Tao that can be spoken of or trodden is not the everlasting Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Free of desire, one perceives its mysteries. With desire, one perceives its manifestations. Transcendence and entrapment diverge from the same source. This source we call the mystery. Transformation between them is an enigmatic process born forth from the mysterious path. That's Daodejing. Let's look at what it actually talks about within this tradition that actually worked with cultivation, not with the psyche. Just to remind us to differentiate psychoanalysis, whatever works with the contents of the psychological mind, the heart mind, or the Xin, as we call it in Chinese. Cultivation works with, first with Qi, then with body, Wai Qi, then with actual spiritual aspect, which is the soul, the Shen, and further, all the way towards the divinity with the aim to touch upon the divinity eventually. So what this first verse of Daodejing speaks about in a nutshell is this whole process of how to return back to that pure potential, that spiritual core of our being, yeah, that which precedes 10,000 things, manifestation, nomination, arising of thought streams, arising of the heart mind, arising of the psyche. Yeah. Shin, heart mind, is what distracts us or prevents us from touching upon the pure potential that is there, that sits there at the origin of us in our, so to speak, true self. That pure potential we call Shentian. Shentian. Okay. Shentian. The literal translation is before heaven or before arising of the mind, because heaven is what they equated with the mind. Whereas earth and man are equated with such manifestations as energy and organizing field. So say we have that which precedes both heaven, earth, and man, the Shantian. In fact, Shin is also an aspect of man. Let's break it down in the following way. Heaven, Tian. The earth, Ren. Heaven, earth, man. What are these in the Taoist understanding? Well, they are as follows. They are awareness, organizing field, energy. We have these three. Yeah. Generative, and generative is of course Qian. And receptive, Kun. These three come down to Qian and Kun, generative and receptive. For manifestation to occur, yeah, what we have in the first verse of Daodejing. The nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. And man, for that matter. Earth and man are kind of piled into one. This, Shantian, the nameless. It's funny, I just named the nameless. Is the origin of all this. Eventually, these three energy awareness come down to Qian, the generative trigram. Within Bagua, we talk about it as these three lines. Whereas Earth comes down to Kun, which is receptive, which we talk about or depict the way of three broken lines within the I Ching. So the mother of heaven and earth, of generative and receptive, is the nameless. What prevents us to get back to the nameless as this, Shin, the heart-mind, which we worked with via psychoanalysis, for example, and we find difficult because we don't have any access to energy and awareness. So cosmologically, things manifest once the energy flows out of primordial chaos from emptiness. When these three meet, when energy is applied to organizing field, and when awareness is applied to organizing field, they give birth, these three, give birth to something quite cool. These three or these two, doesn't matter. Them together give birth to something known as Xuan, or Xuanmen. I hope this is now entirely confusing. I'll write it here again. Xuanmen. Mysterious gate, that very mystery which the first line of Daodejing speaks about. Yeah. The practice of cultivation brings together awareness, organizing field, and energy, which gives birth to this portal, which we call Xuanmen, or within other traditions, we call it meditation, or jhana, or dhyana, or zen. Well, I should have written chan before the zen, but anyway, doesn't matter. Xuanmen is meditation, is where the meditation is open, is where the door back towards the nameless of pure potential is open. This is where heart-mind has ceased to produce 10,000 things, ceased producing repetitive loops of signification, ceased to resist the letter, ceased to produce the symptoms, ceased to produce creative solutions to symptoms. This happens via training. It cannot happen by itself. It cannot happen as a result of analysis, because we have just seen where analysis ends. In best cases, it ends with the creation of your own solution to the discontent you experience within the heart-mind. This happens via deliberate training. Training to concentrate the mind, training to generate energy, training to nourish the organizing field. Yeah. So we say that once this has been worked with and the pathway towards this mysterious gate has been laid, we say we have gained access to the origin of things, or we say we have established ourselves on the path. So this probably needs some other color altogether. This here. Good old Dao. Via Dao, we do establish ourselves on the path of training, which leads to touching upon the gateway, this is gate, man, to the mystery. Once we have a path and we touched upon the origin, yeah, we tapped into the source everlasting, that which has origin cannot cease. It keeps on manifesting, you know. Whereas that which has been born, that which has a mother, is destined to perish. So that's why in Daodejing it says very clearly, the nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. There it is. Whereas the named, as the mother of 10,000 things of the heart-mind. Heart-mind, mind and psyche, symptoms, mental emotional activity, conceptual activity, proliferation of the mind, whatever creativity of the heart-mind. It's all finite. It will perish eventually because it has been born. Whereas that which has origin, and when we have tapped into that origin, will not perish. It will keep on developing or going further. Yeah. So what's within all this system? What do we call desire? Yeah. And desire probably should stand on the side of the heart-mind. Desire belongs to heart-mind. Desire is a tendency of the mind to latch the seed of thought, such that this thought gives rise to a stream. The stream, via its solidification, via processes which Lacan so beautifully and in a sophisticated manner articulated in his logic of the signifier and his theory of the letter, that stream of thought, continuous production of the narrative in the unconscious, which we are not even, unless we practice or train or whatever, or analyze, are not even aware of. That stream of thought produces what we call yi, or mental intent. It's a nice character. I shall draw it this way. Yi. It also has a few chars as befit the character. It has chars of sound, yin, that's here above. Yin, sound. And of course shin, heart mind. Which is, I think, beautifully depicting again the difference between hieroglyphic mode of tracing and alphabetical one. Beautifully depicting how sound of the heart mind is done. Kind of similar to the definition of the signifier if you follow Levi-Strauss, acoustic image. Sound of the heart mind, a particular mental intent that then become formed via action of desire. So, action of desire leads to continuous proliferation of this process of the heart-mind. Formations of the psyche, patterns of the fundamental fantasy, structure of the subjectivity, you name it. It goes on and on. It narrates itself. It doesn't stop. That's simply the way of the world. It hardly ever stops. Only single individuals manage to find a way for it to stop, to turn the light within and reverse the course of this conditioned becoming process. Once the light is reversed, once the desire no longer invested in the process of feeding the seeds of thought, it turns back upon that which is dark and mysterious, upon that which Lacan rightfully called the real. This here, Xuan, the mystery, the darkness of the cave. That's what Xuan is, the viscosity of this darkness of the cave where no light enters, yeah, disorienting and engulfing, but at the same time magnetizing and galvanizing quality, which arises when ye, this ye, properly turns inward. The sound of the heart-mind enters the cave. Well, it encounters the mystery. Transcendence and entrapment diverge from the same source. This source we call the mystery. Transformation between this source and the heart-mind comes forth from the mysterious path. I think this is the last line kind of summarizes what Lacan is trying to say when he speaks about real, symbolic, and imaginary. This is exactly the process of transformation within the human subjectivity. From the real arises the impetuses, the impulses, the jouissance, which needs to be symbolized by an ordinary mind, by a mind that is trained or has been trained. It no longer needs to be symbolized. One can dwell in there. If one dwells in there, further process of transformation leading back to original, Xiantian, nameless, takes place. Yeah. If the mind still stuck with the created, the heart mind, it does not take place. Eventually, what Daodejing tries to teach or transmit to the reader is that there is a way, Dao specific way, not just general way where somebody walks it. There is a specific way to train the mind to return to the source. This way is what we call, I run out of colors. Oh no, I haven't. This way is what we call Xinjai. Xinjai. Xinjai stands for heart-mind fasting. The mind is taken back to the potential prior to manifestation. How is it done? So when a seed of thought pops into the awareness when one sits meditation, when it just pops into awareness, it's on the border between Shentian and what we call Hotian. Heart-mind is what we can consider Hotian, or after manifestation, or after heaven, after it has entered awareness. Once that seed of thought has entered the awareness, it then runs database of filters, preconceived ideas, structures of subjectivity, various constructs which have been acquired, which we identify with I or with a subject, with either my ego or my subjectivity. These causes various categorizations, likes and dislikes, or irrelevance to the phenomena that has been experienced, which led to arising of that seed of thought. This is the process of labeling. This process is again what we call heart-mind. Practice of heart-mind fasting consists in the not allowing the mind to enter this process of proliferation when the seed of thought pops into the mind. So if we looked at the techniques of common meditations such as Vipassana and Shamatha. Vipassana looks at the structures, phenomena, sankhara, as they call mental formations, that have arisen, and examines them on the subject of their impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and selflessness. So in such a way, Vipassana is something that can be done after the thought has entered the thought stream. Whereas Shamatha is deliberate training of the mind to remain with one object only. So say it's a breath, the most banal. When something pops up into the mind is returned to its object. It's not allowed to further proliferate and follow that seed of thought. Okay, now heart-mind fasting, Shinjai, happens, which will lead back again to the mysterious gate, back to the nameless, which is originary to us, our very being. Now, the question is, if somebody experiences psychic suffering, symptoms, invasive obsessive thoughts, compulsions, intense depression or sadness, aversion or anger, should one be doing this practice? Or can one do this practice? The answer is no. No. The intensity of the heart-mind is too high and needs to be dealt with via more ordinary means, such as psychoanalysis or some other form of therapy, so that it can enter some modicum of contentment first. So then one can practice this path. Yeah? Once again, the implication that the heart-mind, in comparison to this, is easy. It's easy to deal with in comparison to this. In itself, it may not be easy if one doesn't have any other perspective, not looking at it. Okay, so this is one model. The model which follows the first verse of Daodejing and kind of summarizes this whole process. The entire Daodejing is the very detailed text on how to do this practice. Shinjai, the heart-mind fasting. Let us look into another very common verse or phrase found in Taoist jargon. And let me write it down first in characters. Ren, Fa, Di. Ren, Fa, Di. Man, follow, earth, Di, Fa, Tian. Earth follows heaven. Tian Fa Dao. Heaven follows Dao. Dao, Fa, Ziran. I love Ziran as a character. Dao follows Ziran. Not gonna speak about it. Okay, so how to translate it? We shall translate it. Man can be translated as heart mind. Heart mind. Heart mind follows earth. What does earth mean? Earth means forms, and not just physical forms, mental forms. So heart mind follows mental forms. Okay. Mental forms follow heaven. What is heaven? Heaven is the mind. Here, heart mind can be also equated to acquired subjectivity. Everything that we speak about in terms of the subject's psyche, fundamental fantasy, subjectivity in general, conscious and unconscious, interplay of the signifiers within the unconscious, the insistence of the latter, all of that is acquired subjectivity or man, Ren. Where is the mind? Here. Oh, and by the way, heart mind follows mental forms, as we just spoken about in Lacanian logic of the signifier, yeah? The mental forms are simply a repetition automatism, the pattern which runs in the unconscious. That very pattern that runs in the unconscious is dependent upon the mind as the condition. The got to be the mind as an organ. As we know, within these traditions, mind is equated to organ, just like nose is the organ for smelling, so is the mind is the organ for the formations of the mind to occur. We'll break it down in a bit. So the mind follows the path. And what is the path? Well, it's a deliberate, particular, systematic mode of training, which needs to be done, again, deliberately, systematically. The path originates from and leads to the soul. Okay, that's the translation. Let us again talk it over. The first stage of it, let's even number all these. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first stage is the stage of the acquired subjectivity and working with it. How does it work? Well, repetition automatism inherent in language as symbolic system runs the show, runs the subject and their self-narration. Repetition is present due to signifying chain, insistently repeats, because it's been organized in the symbolic system, which has laws and sequences that enable signifiers to circulate in the unconscious in a particular way, specific to this particular signifying system, to this particular language, to this particular modus operandi, be it physics or mathematics or, I don't know, world system of the trilogy of Star Wars and all the add-ons to it, because it also formulates a certain signifying system. Doesn't matter. To these also relate fundamental fantasy, the mode of structural handling of jouissance via language by a particular subject. Yeah. So a subject tries to enact or reenact the access to the satisfaction lost via upbringing, whatever, via acquisition of language, yeah, and return back to it. That's the whole human drama of the base desires. On this level also play out memory, both apparent memory and repressed memory, which circulates within signifying chains and override the subject. And on this level also operates the letter, yeah? This very irreducible to acoustic image insistence of disturbance within the psyche, which borders upon the real of the drive, borders upon jouissance. That's level 1. Psychoanalysis very much works here. Level 2. Lacan touched upon it when he spoke about the structure of signifier and its logic. Mental forms, in their complexity of language, fantasy, and letter, follow mind itself. That is the sixth sense, and that probably is where it's worth explicating a bit. Okay, so we have mind, yeah, mind object, whatever it is, object, image, thought, concept, and mind consciousness. So these two constitute this triumvirate of that which we shortly call mind. But it's not just mind, it's mind object and mind consciousness. Just like any other sense has its object and its adjacent consciousness, so does the mind. So the three are interdependent, like a tripod. Like I have a camera which is filming me, it stands on the tripod, you remove one leg, it collapses. Same here. This is all there is for majority of people, of worldly people, as they are called within Buddhism, or as they're called within Daoism, vulgar people, or as they're called is in Pali, Buddhist jargon, patujana. Patujana. This word, puthu, like I said, it's going to be a little bit of an excursion into various etymologies today. Many folk, or diverse. That's what puthu means. In some ancient commentaries, it is also linked to the Sanskrit root of a word as pratak. And that means separate. Separate or apart from. In terms of this word, and in jhana, not jhana. Jhana means people. People. Diverse people separate from what? Separate from truth, or separate from Tao, separate from the path. We can say, boom, separate. My writing just deteriorates the further it goes. Separate from Tao. So that's the modus operandi of the ordinary people. Yeah, the mind touches upon a mental object. At this moment, when these two have a connection, and we call this moment contact. At the moment of contact, mind consciousness arises at this moment. Meeting of three, boom. We have a certain form, certain imprint. Because there is no path, say we haven't gone here yet, we are on these first two levels. Mental forms follow mind, Di, Fa, Tien. Well, it just circulates here. Yeah, it's a closed system. It's the system of repetition. That's where Lacan speaks of repetition automatism, or Buddhists speak of the rotating in the wheel of samsara. Things simply repeat here. There's nothing new. Mental form arises. It runs through the base of previously acquired mental forms. It is assessed on the subject of its attraction, aversion, or irrelevance. It is then either dumped into unconscious, where it circulates with all the other rejected, repressed mental forms, or it is included on the level of the ego, where it circulates on the level of all the accepted, integrated as me and my mental forms, or it is dismissed as irrelevant and kind of also gets dumped into unconscious as irrelevant as well. That's where Patujana or worldling operates. In the Buddhism we call them run-of-the-mill, ordinary untrained people. Why? Well, because they haven't yet actually encountered Tao. They are still separate from Tao. They're still separate from the way, the noble path, or whatever, Daoism. So, what are the characteristics of people who dwell on this level, dwelling outside? Let's write them down. Actually, we might be even yeah, we delineate them. Patujana, the worldling, not jhana, Patujana, cultivator. So, what are the differences? Patujana dwells outside. What does dwelling outside mean? It means dwelling in the formations of the mind. Even though, say, within psychology or psychoanalysis, we call the inside that which is opposite to the outside, the world of expressed forms. Within cultivation, we still call it outside, because mental forms are still that which is happening, that which is getting done. Whatever is being done is still outside, because you're doing it, because you're still involved. You're not still, you're not inward, you're not in the Xuan, you're not in the vacuity of the cave. You're not dwelling in meditation. When you are not dwelling in meditation, you are outside. Yeah. You are in the mind forms, so the fashionings of subjectivity. Patujana is subject to desire and drive. Once again, a subject of psychoanalysis. In whom desire causes seeds of thoughts to grow, proliferate, circulate in repetitive patterns of automatism, and for whom drive, the corporeal tension of base desires, is still an issue, still poses problem, and still insists. Right. Motivated by fear and anger. Fear and anger are two primary motivations, two primary driving forces. Why? Well, because attachment to that which is attractive, liked, accepted as self, integrated in the ego, causes aversion to anything that is not integrated into the ego, anything that is threatening ego, anything that is rejected and repressed and unconscious. Fear in turn arises towards that which has been repressed or rejected, and anger arises when the proximity of that repressed and rejected arises. In proximity to undesired arises anger. So the motivation of the worldling is to avoid whatever causes fear and fight it off by means of anger. Whenever there's threat of loss of that which is liked and accepted and seen as self, whether my self, my property, my loved ones, my country, my people, my culture, my religion, my way of life, wherever any of that is threatened, arise both fear and anger, and they motivate actions, and inevitably this will be threatened because such is the nature of life. So we have what? Dwell outside, run according to desire and drive, motivated by fear and anger, and averse towards the real. Averse towards the real. Averse towards that very xuan, the mystery, the vacuity of the cave. Averse because afraid of loss of self, because loss of self is kind of what occurs once the meditation is entered, hence averse to turning light within. Because averse towards the real, also alienated as a consequence within the symbolic and the imaginary. Okay, well, we pretty much described these two levels. Let's go to the third level. This level only starts when somebody actually embarks on the path of cultivation and starts to do something unnatural. Mind follows the path. Mind follows the path only in case of deliberate practice, which starts from what? It starts from upholding of the moral and ethical precepts. Not killing, not stealing, not lying, not committing sexual misconduct, not consuming intoxicants causing heedlessness. Further deliberate training involves specific exercise of the body, energy and awareness in order to maximize the efficiency, enable capacity to remain on the object for a long periods of time, and eventually tailored to build one up towards touching upon the mysterious gate or entering meditation. This is called swimming against the stream or reversing the light within. Somebody who does it are called cultivators or practitioners or whatever. They don't need to be called at all anything, to be honest. Key characteristics. Leads inside. Inside. Again, away from mind, mental forms, subjectivity, functioning of the linguistic systems. Leads inside. From mental forms of acquired subjectivity via body and chi. This is key. Body and chi. Leads towards Xuanmen, mysterious path and the soul. It's never done via psychological method. That's the key. It's not done via digging deep into one's unconscious, analyzing one's traumas, Lacanian practice, wherever it is, traversing of fundamental fantasy, invention of the individual solution of dealing with psychic suffering, aka Phantom. That's not cultivation. This is not something that leads inside. It's something that may lead to a certain form of contentment and psychological calm and just being a good, nice person, nice to be around, but it doesn't lead inside. What leads inside is training of the body, building of chi, absorption of the mind in chi, and remaining of the awareness, chi, and the organizing field of chi, yin chi, together. Yeah. What does it require? Requires deliberation. Deliberation and willpower deliberation and willpower to uphold the continuous training. It requires inspiration to even start, or a particular encounter with suffering. It requires integrity to follow, to continuously maintain moral integrity and practice integrity. As a result, it purifies, ennobles, engenders detachment. Purifies, ennobles, and engenders detachment. And it's not just abstract stuff. It is paired, it is tangible, physical, energetic, and mental changes. There are a series of markers that take place along the way of this path of cultivation that are very clear, that cannot be confused with anything else, that signify that the progression on the path takes place. I will not go into detail of talking about these changes, but they are certainly described in such teachings as sinew changing, classic, in the sequence of stages of enlightenment, etc. They can be found. Now, that's stage 3. Stage 4. The path, once it's entered, paradoxically originates from, but also leads to the soul, leads to the divine. The path causes one to touch upon so-called true self or shin. Shin. Then it leads to the soul. Then it leads to spirit. Then it leads to divinity. Okay. That's sort of it in a nutshell. The results of the path are to be discovered for yourself, and the process of walking it also to be discovered for yourself. So, in this little, well, not little, ended up nearly 2 hours chat, I really wanted to show the points of crossover between psychoanalytic practice and theory of the psyche, human subjectivity, and the practice of cultivation and the practice as is that leads beyond psyche, beyond subjectivity, towards something real, true, genuine. Okay. I hope it wasn't too convoluted, but this nature of these subjects is complex. And as I've mentioned a few times, psyche and subjectivity are only small, only the first level of the process. Anyway, thank you.